Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. But right now, it is again turtle time. Thank you all very much for joining another Turtle Survival Alliance webinar experience. My name is Jordan Gray. I am the host and the External Relations Manager of the Turtle Survival Alliance. And we are going to give just a few minutes for all of the registrants to filter in. While we do that, I'll give a few housekeeping rules. So we have this wonderful Q&A feature. That is what you will want to use to be able to put questions in for the panelists. So the way this is going to work today is we have 7 panelists, and I'm going to ask a question of each of them, and they will then provide their response. After that, we'll go through another round of questions. Following those 2 rounds of questions, we are going to have a open Q&A experience. So please, again, put your questions into the Q&A feature. There is a chat feature, however, that is for you all to be able to put in remarks, say hi to each other, even tell us where you're from around the world. Luckily, the Director of Development for Turtle Survival Alliance, Ratri Lertluk is going to be over in the chat feature, putting in different prompts, giving you different resources available, and helping to remind you that if you do have a question, to please move it over into the Q&A. And during the Q&A, I will be able to read the questions aloud and direct them towards certain panelists. Or again, if you have a question that kind of is for everyone, we'll give our panelists a chance to talk. So this webinar is scheduled for 90 minutes or an hour and a half. And with people filtering now, I'm sure Ratri is already popping things into the chat. What I want to do is now move over to welcoming the president and CEO of Turtle Survival Alliance, Marc Dupuy Desormeaux. Marc, please take it away.
Thank you, Jordan, and welcome everybody. Thank you for spending time with us to talk about turtles in trouble. So Turtle Survival Alliance worked with our partners at the Turtle Conservation Coalition, which are members of the IUCN Tortoise and Freshwater Turtle Specialist Group, the Turtle Conservancy, the Turtle Conservation Fund, Rewild, the Colonial Research Foundation, and of course, us at Turtle Survival Alliance. So this report that we're going to talk about today is a follow-up to our 2018 edition. So it's 7 years in the making, and it's a call to action. It's basically drawing urgent attention to species on the brink of extinction. The worst position that these poor turtles are in this book. So hopefully you'll get a really good idea of what's going on. So Turtles in Trouble spotlights the world's most threatened tortoises and freshwater turtles. They tell their stories and tell us what's at stake. So here at TSA, we work tirelessly to make sure that no more turtles go extinct. And we're proud to say that we've worked with 43 of the 66 species featured in Turtles in Trouble. I hope you really enjoyed today's webinar. I was going to now introduce the host and the panelists. You've already met Jordan, our host, but the panelists that we have are Craig Stanford. Craig, wave. There you go, Craig. Anders Rhodin, Andrew Walde, Rick Hudson, Natalia Gallega Garcia, Joe Pignatelli, and Calyar Platt. So these panelists are not only experts in the field, they're also all members of the IUCN Tortoise and Freshwater Turtle Specialist Group. They all bring a unique experience and insight and a deep passion for safeguarding these species. So we're excited to hear about their perspective, and over to you, Jordan.
All right, thank you very much, Marc. It's really exciting to have everyone here. Thank you to all the panelists for joining. So, I want to start out my first question for Craig Stanford. So, Craig is the senior editor on this report. He is the co-chair of the IUCN SSE Tortoise and Freshwater Turtle Specialist Group. And Craig, as Mark talked about a little bit, this edition further moves away from ranking species within a top 25 alignment and instead presents a broader, more representative list of 66 species. As the senior editor of Turtles in Trouble, what was the reasoning behind this shift? And how do you hope it will influence conservation priorities and funding decisions?
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. Let me first say also thank you to TSA for doing this. This is a great event for you guys to do. I'm amazed looking at the chat how many of my colleagues and friends are listening and watching right now. So it's really a great thing and really well attended. Yeah, so this has been done, as you saw on that slide that just popped up, every several years, kind of irregularly. And I've been the chair since 2017, and I've kind of been the overseer of one of the point people for two of these. And we've had this debate that Jordan just mentioned. Should we try to rank order them? Should we have plowshare tortoises or something else, or Rhapidus swinui at the first page, and everything else is kind of rank ordered? And here's the basic problem with that in my view. So IUCN and the Red List coordinator, who is currently Anders Rhodin, who's here, have a set of criteria they've established over many years for how we determine the threat level. Meaning, should we consider a species of whatever we're talking about, whatever animal, to be critically endangered, vulnerable, etc. And it has to do with everything from generation time, estimated reproductive rate, estimated rate of decline. There are lots of criteria involved. So it's all an attempt to be as objective as we can be. And that would make you think that we could have a rank order of some kind. But my problem with it is, let's say we have two species that we're really concerned about. Species A, there are 800 individuals left in the world only, but they live in a national park, all of them. They're very well protected. There's practically no poaching going on. Maybe they breed well in captivity as well. So even though the population is tiny, and that's scary, it is stable. Maybe it's even going to increase in the future. Species B, there are 200,000 or 300,000. So they seem to be, on the surface, much, much less threatened. But they're in absolutely steep decline. There are many species in the world that fall into this example. And they're plummeting. Maybe they're being poached for the pet trade. Maybe they're being poached for food, for both. And maybe their reproductive rate is very slow. So how do we compare those two? And the rank order would only be as good as the data that we have. And the data that we have on the vast majority of species is, to be honest, not great. I think everybody here would agree that there are 360-ish species of, and almost 500 taxa altogether of turtles and tortoises, and only a tiny fraction do we have really excellent information on which to base these assessments. So without wanting to be subjective and without wanting all of the experts to argue endlessly about whose species should be, above other species, I just felt, and I think most of us agreed, that we should just present in this publication all of the species that we felt are really in terrible danger of extinction, such that by the next edition, whenever we produce that in the next several years, might be gone or might be very close to being gone.
I just noticed my own mic was off. I was following my own instructions. All right, yeah, thanks a lot, Craig, for being able to go through that. My next question is for Anders Rhodin. So Anders is the deputy editor of this report, as well as the chair emeritus and vice executive chair of the IUCN SSE Tortoise and Freshwater Turtle Specialist Group, as well as a board member of the Turtle Survival Alliance. Anders, as this report notes, the IUCN SSE Tortoise and Freshwater Turtle Specialist Group is central to assessing species IUCN Red List threat status. How are those assessments generated, and how is the TFTSG adapting its assessments and prioritization work to better understand and address the status of turtles worldwide?
Oh, thanks, Jordan. The specialist group has been doing this for a long time. We started back in the 1980s and have been working steadily since that time to assess species status around the world. My feeling here is that it's not so much that the specialist group is responding to this newest booklet. It's more that the booklet is in fact responding to the work of the specialist group. As Craig has indicated, we do assessments on a global basis and involve specialists from around the globe. The process of deciding what is happening with the populations of turtle species in terms of population reductions and size of habitat and threats that they're facing. Those decisions are made as a group. We have workshops that we hold around the world where we bring in as many possible regional experts as we can, and we get together and we have presentations by the experts on the species, and then an on-the-spot review of the criteria that we're using to assess whether we have very good data or more of an estimation of what the threats are to these species. We are making a huge effort to involve increasingly specialists from developing nations, from the global south, as opposed to just a bunch of expatriate Americans making these decisions. So our workshops are held in the regions where we are focusing. So in the last 2 or 3 years, we've had a number of workshops in Central and South America, as well as in the United States for U.S. species. We're currently planning another workshop in Africa for African species. We had several workshops focusing on Asian species over the years. And it's that process of deciding what species are in most trouble, which drives the Turtles in Trouble booklet in terms of how we decide which ones are most trouble. I need to mention that even though we have 66 species on this list, there's actually 74 species listed as critically endangered on the IUCN Red List. So even though we're focusing on the most critically endangered, there are some that are also considered critically endangered by the IUCN that are not even making it onto this list. Turtles are really in huge trouble. The numbers have gradually gotten worse over the years. Our latest assessment has about 53% of all turtle species threatened, either as critically endangered or vulnerable. But if you look at the number of species that are either threatened or already extinct, there are several species that have already gone extinct, mainly in the 17 and 1800s, but about 55% of all turtles in the modern era are either gone or in serious trouble. So we've got a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of people working. The specialist group is now about 400 people, thanks to Craig's leadership of bringing in more and more people from these different regions. And the more people we have involved, the more we can learn about the species that need help.
All right, thanks a lot, Anders. And you brought up a great point because several of us were there in the meeting in Tucson in 2024, trying to decide what species make this report. And there's several of them, as you mentioned, that are on the cusp. And so many of our activities need to be focused on getting species off of this list or report. And that brings me to my next question for Andrew Walde. So Andrew is an editor of this report. He's the Senior Director of Conservation and Science of Turtle Survival Alliance. So Andrew, um, Turtle Survival Alliance has long emphasized balancing in situ protection with ex situ assurance colonies. How should the conservation community decide when and how to prioritize captive assurance populations versus strengthening habitat protection and in situ conservation programs directly in the countries where threatened turtles are native?
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. It's a great question. And I think the answer is it depends. I mean, Craig just outlined briefly at the beginning there that a species that is below 1,000 animals, but they're all in protected areas, is going to be much more secure than one hanging out next to a city and a river, right? So you're going to have to do an assessment of the species in the wild first and foremost. And that helps you understand the distribution of the remaining populations, but also reveals the threats to that species, assuming that they aren't already known. And from there, you go into this decision matrix of, are there enough animals in the wild to have a meaningful conservation actions? You know, turtles are generally slow to reproduce. So can your in situ conservation boost that population sufficiently, or do you have to rely on ex situ assurance colonies and breeding colonies and head starting to give those a push to get them going quicker? So assuming the habitat's there and you can mitigate the threats, the animals are still in the wild, you want to work with them in the wild whenever you can. Switching over to the breeding in captivity, you open up a whole different set of criteria that need to be met. Can you breed that species in captivity? Is there land available for it? Can you get the food to feed them? Money to pay the staff, because that's captive colonies are expensive and they're a long-term commitment. You're buying in for the long term into that region, and you have to have the money there secure to fund those projects once they get started. So of course, the in situ conservation is your best option whenever you can use it, but ex situ can certainly boost population quickly, or much more quickly than the in situ can, generally speaking. And we're going to hear about that. I see Callie are on the call, so I won't steal any thunder there, but you'll probably hear how in situ conservation coupled with ex situ can really boost population up. And of course, those decisions aren't left to work alone. You have to be working at habitat protection, sometimes restoration, community engagement, education, and outreach from the community level right through to the government level to make any project a success. So every situation and species different, but you just have to get your assessment done and figure it out from there.
Thanks, Andrew. And that segues really well into the question for Rick Hudson. So Rick is an editor of this report. He's also the president emeritus of Turtle Survival Alliance and a deputy chair for the IUCN SSE TFTSG. So Rick, many of the success stories in this report highlight the importance of partnerships between NGOs, governments, and local communities. From your experience at Turtle Survival Alliance, what models of collaboration have proven to be the most effective for achieving long-term conservation gains for turtles?
Thanks, Jordan. That's a great question. I thought about this for a while, and I think that where we've gotten the most traction is when, this is speaking from an organization perspective, where we've gotten the most traction is when we work with established NGOs in range countries and say, we want to work in a country, but these established NGOs, they know the lay of the land, they know the politics, they know how to administer money, they understand, they have contacts within government. There's just a lot of things that we might not have the resources to administer a program there, and they do. I mean, such as human resources, financial management. It's just good. It's really good practice to partner with an established NGO that may not focus on turtles, but has the resources to work in that country. So I think one of the best examples of this was, WCS in Myanmar back in the day. Was a model program. We made tremendous strides with that through that partnership. We still work with WCS to a limited degree in Colombia and Cambodia. I think those are strong examples. Be Free, the Belize Foundation for Research and Environmental Education in Belize is another excellent example of how we've been able to really take a species to the next level. And hopefully that model can expand throughout Central America for the Central American river turtle. Or you look at another example, the example of Luca Lucelli, who's familiar to many of us. I mean, Luca's an academic field biologist, an excellent field biologist, but he has extensive contacts throughout throughout Africa in particular, and increasingly now in Vietnam. He's got a lot of student resources. I mean, he's an excellent partner that helps us advance our mission in countries where we may not have the contacts. So that's my perspective from the TSA's perspective.
Thanks a lot, Rick. Yeah, a lot of good insight there. Of course, all of your years of experience working amongst, amongst and with communities and NGOs provides, I think, everyone here a lot of valuable insight. One of those people that Turtle Survival Alliance started working with years ago and is now on our staff, Natalia Gallego Garcia, is the person I have the next question for. So Natalia is our Director of Conservation Genetics for Turtle Survival Alliance, and she's also the newly anointed co-chair of the IUCN SSE Tortoise and Freshwater Turtle Specialist Group. So, Natalia, the report highlights a pioneering effort for Dahl's toad-headed turtle, Mesoclemys dahli. This represents the first ever genetic rescue strategy for a turtle species. From your perspective as a geneticist, how crucial are genetics and genetic tools for the recovery of this and other species featured in the report?
Thank you, Jordan. So I think the genetics are like the invisible thread, the thread that there is acting fast, but that no one can see. And historically, it has been neglected from the assessments from establishing whether a population is endangered or not. But it is a very important aspect that needs to be assessed when you are considering if a species is threatened or not. So by definition, when you say that a population or a species is threatened, you're talking about populations that have very few individuals left. And when that's the case, there's a lot of negative effects, genetic negative effects that start to appear in the population that are very difficult to see and very difficult to quantify. So when you have very few individuals, the first symptom that you'll start noticing is a loss of genetic diversity. The fewer individuals you have in a population, the faster you start losing genetic diversity. And that's an issue because if you don't have enough diversity, you are more prone to get diseases, to not being able to adapt if your environment changes, which is kind of an important feature in the current days, because habitat and the planet is changing extremely fast. So you need a lot of diversity to be able to adapt to these changes. Another important symptom that you start to notice is that the individuals start to mate with close relatives because there's basically no one left to mate with. And when this happens, there's a lot of inbreeding going on, and inbreeding usually comes with a lot of issues as well. Usually it's more, these individuals are more prone to have issues with fertility. They are more prone to have diseases. And when this happens, the individuals, depending on the type of disease or infertility, you start losing more individuals, right? They will die or they won't be able to reproduce. So basically you start with a small population, and because of the negative effects of genetics, you start to lose individuals. So the population becomes smaller. So then genetic effects act faster, and then you lose more individuals. So the population becomes even smaller. And when you hit that point, it's what we call the extinction vortex, because basically you are starting this kind of negative feedback effect where you lose more individuals, make the population smaller, lose more individuals, make the population smaller. And when you hit that point, the extinction vortex point, it is very difficult to recover a population back unless you start doing extremely management initiatives to prevent this from happening. So these genetic effects are usually occurring in the background, like nobody noticed them, but they are there and they're very important. So whenever you are trying to work with an endangered species, it is extremely important to address genetics as well than like habitat loss and numbers of individuals and the scope and intensity of the threats.
Thank you so much, Natalia. And this whole idea of genetics and looking at these populations, like we can look at a population of a species across a map, but within them, there are oftentimes genetic management units. And the next person who I'm going to ask a question of, we're talking about a species in which there is a northern genetic management unit and a southern genetic management unit that is separated by a couple hundred miles. So my next question is for Joe Pignatelli, and Joe is the leader of a United States field project for Turtle Survival Alliance on the bog turtle, Glyptemes muhlenbergii. So the United States, and this is something that a lot of people don't realize, harbors the greatest species richness of any country in the world. Yet only two of the species fit the criteria for this report, and that's the bog turtle and the flattened musk turtle. One of those being the bog turtle. For Joe, what are the most pressing threats to bog turtles, and what actions are being taken in the United States to preserve their wild population?
Well, thank you, Jordan. The biggest threat to bog turtles is pretty straightforward. It's loss of habitat. The bog turtle is a species habitat specialist, so it needs to have freshwater, emergent wetlands, spring fed. It's not found in ponds and lakes, and it's just a specific type of wetland. And unfortunately, that specific type of wetland was a favorite for draining, filling, sometimes flooding. And as a result, we've lost approximately or estimated around 80% of this specific wetland type. And unsurprisingly, we've also lost a considerable amount of bog turtles as a result of that habitat loss. The good news is that most of that happened, and the indiscriminate filling or draining of wetlands happened before we had things like the Clean Water Act. We have wetland regulations now that are directly, and endangered species regulations that are protecting this species. But also the suitable habitat that we're seeing that's left is a lot of it is fragmented. So there's a small population here. There's some interspersed in suburbia or at the edge of a farm field. We don't have habitat connectivity. We're still it's continuing to be degraded. So what's happening now is states, agencies, US government are aware of this. This is not breaking news. Everyone who's working with bog turtles knows the biggest threat is that habitat and habitat management. So there is a conscious effort to improve, preserve, and find more habitat. So we're trying to get bog turtle habitat and conservation easements protected by state and federal lands, other land management protection programs, get them incorporated into wildlife refuges, and then start looking at restoring the habitats that we do have. Unfortunately, probably over 50%, if not more, of the wetlands that remain have impacts to the hydrology. And when we say impacts, it's not good impacts. Nobody improved the hydrology at these sites. So that's what we're trying to do now. Go back into the sites that we know bog turtles are at that have impacts to the hydrology. Can we restore? Can we improve? Then also looking at things like managing the vegetation. The bog turtle habitat has lost that elastic properties that really is in a natural system vital for them. So if a beaver dam comes in and floods a wetland in a natural system, the turtles can move to the field. Maybe that field will start to have natural succession and turn into appropriate habitat. But now that habitat is being flanked by roads, by housing developments. And as a result, these turtles being trapped there. And when that beaver comes in and floods that area, these turtles no longer have a place to go. So looking at that hydrology and then trying to connect these populations together is just vital to their survival. Yeah, that's the main thing. Habitat loss, habitat destruction, and now trying to work and restore it.
Thanks a lot, Joe. And this is an example of a species where there are successes being made. We're seeing new recruitment into populations. Though the numbers of bog turtles still remain only in the thousands, hopefully through the work of all these different partners and with habitat land management and habitat restoration, this is something where we can possibly move the needle for this turtle. So that brings me to my question for our next panelist, because as we said earlier, it's so important for us as a turtle conservation coalition to move the needle for these species. We want these species to not be listed or highlighted or featured in this report. It's so important for us to continue to work towards moving these species away. So my next question is for Kalyar Platt. And Kalyar Platt is the Myanmar Program Director for Turtle Survival Alliance, as well as the Southeast Asia Regional Vice Chair for the IUCN SSE Tortoise and Freshwater Turtle Specialist Group. So Kalyar, the recovery of the Burmese star tortoise from being functionally extinct in the wild to more than 20,000 individuals now in the country of Myanmar, with several thousand released into protected sanctuary, is often described as one of the greatest turtle conservation success stories, if not wildlife conservation success stories. What have we learned about ensuring these reintroduced populations become self-sustaining over the long term?
Hi, for Burmese star tortoise, it's still so popular in the wildlife trade, unfortunately. So to protect this species and to have a self-sustainable population in the Myanmar wildlife sanctuaries is the key thing, most important thing is the law enforcement to keep this species to be protected. We reintroduced them, almost like 3,000 star tortoises to 2 wildlife national parks in Myanmar already. And when we reintroduce them, we have to practice like self-release first for a certain period. After that, we let them go freely, but monitored with the radio telemetry data, radio telemetry for 2 years afterwards. So from 5-6 years of our work, give us we learned a lot of lessons that these Burmese tortoises, they re-establish in 2 national parks are quite successfully. They are now reproducing in the wild, and also, a lot of good things that I can say, like we have quite successfully doing this species re-established in Myanmar. From compared to 20 years ago and now, that more than 20,000 star tortoises in the captive breeding center, almost 3,000 already reintroduced, and keep doing egg translocations every year at 2 locations. But we still have a lot of struggling. That's because of the wildlife trade demand, illegal wildlife trade demand. The main problems we are facing is like theft and poaching. Theft is more because, when we do the soft release, we pen them, they are concentrating big numbers in the pen and vulnerable. And poaching is lesser extent because, if poachers come in, they try to look for tortoises, it still take time to look for. So the best thing or the most important thing, we have to give them law enforcement and then protection to the star tortoises and also to their habitat. So we need to monitor, protect. So right now, like you all know, the situation in Myanmar, the law enforcement thing, it's not only enough to ensure these species are fully protected. So what we all doing is also, community conservation, and the community working together with us, and then all the people are working together with us in the field and are watching the tortoises and patrolling. And then, when they patrol, they can intercept the poachers, and then the community, they can give protection. So when the how should I phrase it? Law enforcement alone are not sufficient for like 100% protection to the species. Then community conservation, the community team can also involve in this, long fight for Burmese star tortoise survival. So that's what we are keep doing it, and hopefully that this species will survive, successfully for a long time.
Thanks so much, Kalyar. And this has always been so inspiring for people to talk about. This is the result of 2 decades of work, and work that will no doubt continue and must continue. I think we all need to realize that just like turtles and tortoises, conservation of these animals is at a turtle's pace. And so sometimes we don't see what we might see as successes or achievements for many, many years. With the Burmese star tortoise, it's been an example of what one might consider rapid success. But when we look at the long-term recovery of the species and being able to once again populate the central dry zone of Myanmar, this is still going to take a lot more time and effort. And I definitely applaud your efforts. And that brings me back now to Craig Stanford. So Craig Stanford, again, is the senior editor of Turtles in Trouble. So Craig, the introduction of Turtles in Trouble, the first 12 pages, highlights both worsening extinction risk trends and important conservation successes, as we just noted from Calyar. How did you balance presenting the urgency of the crisis with showcasing hopeful case studies? And what message do you want most readers, especially policymakers and donors, to take away?
Yeah, that's a pretty profound question. I'll start with the second part of what you asked me. I really think that for myself, and I hope for everybody, that optimism has to be your mindset. And I know it's very easy, everybody who's listening knows it's very easy to be pessimistic about the fate of some of the species we're talking about, especially thinking about the long-term future into the next century or more. But I really firmly believe that optimism is not only more enjoyable as a mindset, it's also much more productive. If you go to work every day passionate about what you do and also believing that there'll be a positive outcome for the work you put in, that's the way it works. And I do think if you look at projections of, for instance, world population, human population, which is now projected to peak in the near future and then decline over a long period of time, that the possibility exists that we just need to get these species through the next century and a half, and that's a long time, and they will be a better future for them, more space to live. And so we're kind of shepherds, and we'll turn over our work to another generation, and maybe some of that next generation are students and young people who are listening, and that would be great to think, and we would succeed. So in terms of the top 25 publication, yeah, I think it's really important to note that there are success stories. I mean, we don't do sea turtles, for instance. That's another specialist group. But some of the sea turtle populations have rebounded. And what we've seen is that when they're protected for about 20 years, even some of the most devastated populations, those that survive 20 years later, if you protect their nests, protect the animals, suddenly they're back on the beaches in large numbers. We've seen that in Mexico. We've seen it in other parts of the world. That, to me, gives enormous hope. And for some of the species that we're talking about in the publication, in the book, yes, there are absolutely success stories. And I think that Calyar and Steve Platt's work in Myanmar, right now they're dealing with civil war and all of this unrest. It's really difficult to work there. They've been incredibly courageous. But before the Civil War started, I would point to their project as an enormous success story at reconstituting a population of a species that was basically functionally just gone in the wild. And I'm pretty confident that once this war is over and they can work freely again, that they'll go back to that success track. So again, I'm trying to be optimistic about that situation. So yeah, we highlight these, and sometimes, as I said in my other comment earlier, sometimes the species seem to be on the absolute brink of extinction. Things seem really bleak, but they are turtles. And so one of the things about turtles that's not true for lots of other animals is they live a very long time. And so you can find adults out there that you can either bring it into a captive breeding situation, or you can simply protect them in the wild. And if they survive the onslaught of humanity that's either poaching them or developing their habitat or whatever, their longevity is actually an enormous thing in their favor. Because you can have 100-year-old, and we've had this happen with various, Galapagos subspecies, for instance, or Aldabras, where you have 100-year-old animals that are still around, and they're still even reproductive age. So I actually think that, I'm not going to say that I'm 100% certain that we'll save every single taxon of the nearly 500, but I am really confident that in the long-term future, we will save the vast majority, and that dedicating ourselves to not a single extinction, which is TSA's motto, is actually a very realistic one.
Greg, I love that you brought up the word optimism because I know for probably everyone on this panel, we've all gotten the question of how do you continue to work in conservation amidst all of the threats and the setbacks, and what it is optimism. You just keep working away because that is what is ingrained in all of us, is to keep working towards small achievements which lead to a bigger goal. Now, there is an avenue for people to work towards those achievements. And that's my next question. And that is for Anders Rhodin. And again, Anders Rhodin is the deputy editor of this report. So, Anders, as the co-chair of the Turtle Conservation Fund, a coalition that administers a turtle conservation and research grants focused on endangered tortoises and freshwater turtles, do you see TCF's funding priorities evolving in response to this newly published report? And if so, how?
Yeah, thanks, thanks, Jordan. You know, what Craig was just saying is important, that conservationists are optimists. My feeling also is that not only do we need to be optimistic, but I feel like we all have what I call a moral imperative to help these species. I think that's really important. But it's hard to help unless you have the resources to do so. And the Turtle Conservation Fund was created to help provide resources specifically for endangered turtles and tortoises. Not for sea turtles, they have a lot of good support, but freshwater turtles and tortoises have, they've been the lost souls of the conservation world until things began to change about 20, 25 years ago. And as a result, the Turtle Conservation Fund has relied quite extensively on the publications of these top 25 booklets that have come out. As we see project applications come into us, almost invariably, most of them focus on the species that are being listed in the current version of the Turtles in Trouble booklet. And this goes all the way back to 2003 when we first started that. And as the booklets and the Turtles in Trouble concept has developed, that has become a guidepost really for people out there who are looking for support. And the Turtle Conservation Fund has been privileged to provide a lot of that support. We've been working now for 22 years. We have granted, I have to look at my numbers, 387 projects for a total of $1.7 million that we've given out at an average of about $5,000 per grant. These are small grants. They are mainly focused on people who need a small amount of money to get programs started. And that's critically important, especially in the global South, where $5,000 makes a huge difference in terms of getting a program going. And so that eventually then they can hopefully apply to larger funds where they can get substantial support. But we were the first fund to actually focus on freshwater turtles and tortoises. Now, as a result of what we started back in 2003, several of us, and most specifically Russ Mittermeier, who was very instrumental in getting the Turtle Conservation Fund started, also convinced the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi to create a species-focused fund as well. And that's the Mohammed bin Zayed Species Conservation Fund. And I'd like to give a plug for that fund as well, where Russ and I are on that advisory board. That fund also focuses on freshwater turtles and tortoises, in addition to all other species on the globe. But because they have such a huge amount of money, we've been able to allocate almost $2 million since 2009 for freshwater turtles and tortoises. So if you look at the two funds that are focused on freshwater turtles and tortoises, we have provided more than $3.5 million in funding for freshwater turtles and tortoises. I think that's hugely important. At the same time, these grants do not drive the organizations that we're dealing with here. The Turtle Survival Alliance does not rely on these small grants. You rely on bigger grants and bigger donors, and that's as it should be. The TSA and the Turtle Conservancy both have made huge investments in turtle conservation work around the globe. And that's what it takes. It takes money to make progress in this field. The TSA, through all its country programs, the Turtle Conservancy, through its acquisition of key critical habitats for endangered species. These are the important building blocks of how you, reach that optimistic goal of saving all these species. The only taxa that we have lost to extinction in the last century are just the subspecies, the Pinta Island tortoise with a single animal. And now, unfortunately, the Fernandina giant tortoise will probably also lose because there's only one single animal known to exist, and they have not found any more. But with our combined efforts from all these organizations in the Turtle Conservation Coalition, I'm convinced and I'm certain that we will be able to save the rest of them, whether that is for a while in holding areas and protected areas with lots of law enforcement, et cetera, or whether we can actually save them truly in the wild, that remains to be seen. But I'm convinced that with the manpower we have working in all these organizations and the funds and the resources that we have available, we can do it. Now, of course, we do need more. We always need more. There's always too much that needs to be done, or not enough people and not enough resources. So I encourage anyone who's listening to this webinar to get involved and do what you can. Send some money into whatever organization you'd like to support and help these people get the work done, and come to our symposia and get involved and reach out. And if you want to do some work yourself, send us a proposal. Send it to the Turtle Conservation Fund for up to $5,000. Send it to the Mohammed bin Zayed Fund for up to $10,000 or more from that fund. And there's just lots of opportunities to get out there and do the work. I encourage people to do so. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Anders. I love that you talk about the opportunities available. I love that we're continuing this theme of optimism. And in continuing this theme of optimism, I'm going to bring it back around to Andrew Walde, who once again is the Senior Director of Conservation and Science for Turtle Survival Alliance. So, Andrew, as you look ahead to the next decade, where do you see the greatest opportunities for Turtle Survival Alliance and the Turtle Conservation Coalition to make the most meaningful conservation gains, whether through new science, innovative management strategies, or expanded global partnerships?
Well, as we've all discussed now, it's not a one-size-fits-all game. So I think we have to do everything, and we have to do it all at once. New science, new techniques, anything, new management strategies. And we have to expand the global partnerships, which is what Anders was just talking about. I think the role of the TSA and the turtle conservation community at large, Turtle Conservation Coalition, if you want, lies in bringing all the necessary tools that we have in our toolbox, both new and existing partnerships, and expanding those right now. We need to grow the turtle army by training local biologists or interested conservation practitioners, but not just training them. As Anders was saying, you can have the tools for success for turtle conservation, but without the funding to back these people in the countries that they live in and work in, they're not going to be successful. I can't tell you the number of people that all the people on this panel, I'm sure, have talked to while they're traveling around the globe who want to work on turtles, but they're working traditional 9-to-5 jobs as they can't find funding to do what they're passionate about. At the same time as that statement's being made, we're working on species or need to work on species that have never had a population survey completed for them. So all in, I'd say we need a turtle army, and it's time to create a new baseline for turtle populations globally. So we know what we're working with and we know what we're working towards.
All right, thanks a lot, Andrew. So we know what we're working towards. I want to take a step back with Rick Hudson, who again was one of the founders of the Turtle Survival Alliance and its first president. Rick now serves as the president emeritus of Turtle Survival Alliance. So, Rick, looking back on the 2 decades since you helped establish the Turtle Survival Alliance, what lessons stand out most about building lasting conservation programs in range countries? And how do you think the next generation of turtle conservationists should carry the work forward to help remove species from this most threatened list?
Thanks, Jordan. I want to continue the theme of optimism just briefly and say that optimism is really important, but it's also important to be incredibly stubborn and resilient in this business, and basically unwilling to accept defeat. So those are important qualities. Without a doubt, I think lasting success is going to be built on I think our most effective programs within TSA are those that have full-time staff and build programs. I mean, I think that word programs is really important because it's, you're working on multiple facets, multiple areas in a program. It's not just having one project. It's having staff and a lot of resources. And so these programs, it really depend on sustained funding. Well, how do we do that? I look at Madagascar as a great example. Madagascar program has over 60 full-time employees, and it's a multifaceted program. I mean, it attracts donor support because it covers so many areas, from rescue to reintroduction to enforcement, and we've got basically something for everyone. Establishing a program like that doesn't happen overnight. It requires sustained funding, but once those programs get moving, I think they really are kind of, just kind of steamroll and attract their own level of support. Donors from my experience, they like established programs with proven track records. And I think that only can happen when you are committed to a certain region or certain country. I mean, so the message is, don't dabble, commit. And I think that's really a strong message. We've got to establish programs with full-time staff to really get traction. You're not going to establish relationships with government unless you are steady, unless you have a presence there all the time. Things happen fast in these countries. The landscape's constantly changing. The threats change overnight, and we've seen that with our Madagascar program. I mean, we think we're coasting along fine, and the next thing you know, we've got 17,000 tortoises dumped in our lap, which was a game changer for us and still is. We have to look at that situation as not a liability, but an asset. The way this species is headed, that group of confiscated tortoises that we have is really could be the key to survival for that species if we are strategic in how we manage them and reintroduce them and seed new populations. It's all about being strategic. Anyway, so I hold up Madagascar as our best example, and that's I think that's the model that we want to shoot for. To the next generation that wants to get involved, I think the first step is try to attend a TSA conference. make contacts, go there, attend training webinars, attend sessions, any kind of training that's offered, take it. Start volunteering at with, for instance, the NAFTA groups that are going to Belize and other countries, and getting baseline data on turtle populations. I mean, get involved at that level. It's just important to be part of a more of a large scale organization to really get traction. So I think it all starts if you're, just getting into the businesses, getting your name out there, going to a conference and establishing contacts.
Thanks a lot, Rick. And getting started for all those watching, especially those with families, or if you're mentoring somebody, I'll bet for all of the panelists, we all started at a very young age getting involved hands-on with something, and that is so important to building the interest in this next generation. Rick also brought up the strength of communities and having these communities that are really engaged in the conservation of a species. And that brings me to my next question. And this one is for Natalia Gallego Garcia, who again is the Director of Conservation Genetics for Turtle Survival Alliance and the co-chair of the IUCN SSE TFTSG. So Natalia, there are two Colombian endemics highlighted in the report, the Magdalena river turtle and the Dall's toad-headed turtle, which you already spoke about. Much of the survival of the Magdalena river turtle hinges on community-based conservation in Colombia. What role should organizations like Turtle Survival Alliance and others play in supporting range country partners to ensure the long-term recovery of this species, the Magdalena River turtle?
So before I answer your question, I just want to expand a little bit what Craig and Andrew said about how to determine whether the species is endangered or not, because these two species highlight another aspect, which is when a species is unique in an evolutionary perspective. So these two endemic species are threatened because they first of all, they have small populations, but also because they are the only members of their families that occur at the west side of the Andes. And that makes them more special than the other members of their families. And that's another way to kind of determine whether a species needs a little bit more attention or not. So back to your question, Jordan, I think Rick and Andrew already touched base on the importance that local communities are in conservation. Conservation is a long-term process. It takes a lot of years to recover a species, and it is virtually impossible for someone who's not in the same geographic space and as the species is to take over these actions. So there's no one better suited to do the management or to implement conservation initiatives than locals. But it is a combination of having the technical expertise. Sometimes the locals do have the expertise, sometimes they do not, and they need the training and they need experts to show them how to recover these populations. They also need, as Rick and Andrew explained before, funding to do this. This is not cheap. And usually they don't have the funds to do these techniques. So they also need the financial support from organizations to recover these populations. And once they're trained, once they know what they have to do, and once they have the funds to do these, they are the best allies to do conservation. And I think it's kind of a two-way process, because they also benefit from what organizations such as the TSA can bring to them through conservation. Sometimes conservation was not in their, in their minds. They didn't see that as an opportunity to find a purpose to work. Sometimes conservation can bring direct jobs for them, so funding opportunities for them. Sometimes conservation can bring indirect ways of finding jobs, like, for instance, tourism. So that like conservation brings a lot of opportunities for the local communities as well. And when they receive the proper training, they also learn different skills that they can actually use in other areas. So I think it's like a two-way benefit, basically. Like organizations or conservation organizations can benefit from the help of the local communities, but the local communities can also benefit from the help of the organizations. And this team effort is the best scenario that you can have for long-term conservation actions, which is what you need in order to recover a species.
Thanks a lot, Natalia. And in recovering species, there's lots of ways to do it, especially working amongst different agencies, whether that's state or federal, regional, municipal. I know with the Magdalena River turtle, of course, the project with Tortugas del Sinu in Cotaca Arriba. Yeah, sorry, I know that made you laugh there as I work to pronounce that really quick. So that brings me to my next question for Joe Pignatelli, who again is a U.S. field project leader for the bog turtle program for the Turtle Survival Alliance. So the conservation of bog turtles requires collaboration across multiple states and agencies. What has this species taught us about coordinating conservation at a landscape scale, and how might those lessons apply to other at-risk species?
Well, first, great picture of me, Jordan. Thanks for for sharing that. Before I answer, I got to caveat it. I'm not an agency representative, so I wasn't part of any interagency correspondence, but I did get to see the outcome. I was at the conservation meetings, at the bog turtle meetings where we talked about it. We came up with the ideas for the bog turtle conservation plan of the Northeast. We talked about the species assessment. We gave our input. And what was really nice about this was you have these documents that have a dozen authors, have countless inputs from the academia, from the researchers, from the bog turtle surveyors, it just encapsulates the entire group of people who are working at this turtle. And they took the income and they asked us what the threats were, and we ranked them. And we then worked up a plan, or they worked up the plan of what can happen and how they can implement conservation strategies. And as we've said a couple of times on this call, there is no one size fits all. Everything is a little different, and there's nuances to the strategies. But having a base document that's agreed upon and developed with the input of the pertinent parties, of the state biologists, of the appropriate federal ones, of the nonprofits, of the people who are out there, doing the research, of landowners, of the people whose property it's going to impact, is just vital to this. And when you get something like that, then you can look at it and you can reference it. So yes, the funds that are in New Jersey versus the funds that are in Maryland or Massachusetts might be different. The availability of staff or the resources or the priorities of the state might not, but at least we have something we can go back on. We have something that everyone agrees is important and valuable. So us as the Turtle Survival Alliance, when we want to do projects in New Jersey, I went to the conservation plan. I looked at what was being suggested and the actions that wanted to be taken. We found funding and we implemented it. Of course, we had to get agency buy-off and we got our scientific collecting permit, but knowing what they wanted and being able to then further the conservation goal that's agreed upon by all the pertinent biologists was really valuable. So I guess to look at it is when you get people who care about this stuff and you listen to them and you take their input and you can create a document or some guidance, then it can be implemented through various other ways and years down the line. And of course, there's tweaking here or there, and a site in South Carolina is not going to be the same as a site in New Jersey. But the fundamental ideas of habitat management, how to do our surveys, the techniques, the protocols, they all are succinct and they work, and then they can be reproduced and you can see how the trends are in different states or different areas because it's being done all with the same guidelines. And I think that's really what it comes down to is get a plan that involves the people who are overseeing it and who are a part of it, and then get their input to develop the protocols. And that's really the best thing that the bog turtles taught us.
Excellent answer, Joe. Thank you very much. Now I will move to our last question before we proceed to the Q&A, which I think is always the most fun part of these webinars and a chance for all of the panelists to be able to provide answers. So this one is for Kalyar Platt. And again, if you are just recently joined, Kalyar is the Myanmar Program Director for Turtle Survival Alliance. So Kalyar, the recovery of the Burmese roof turtle from just a handful of known individuals is often cited as one of the most dramatic turtle conservation success stories. What do you see as important to ensure released turtles survive, and what lessons from this program can be applied to other riverine species facing similar challenges?
Hey, hi. About Burmese roof turtles. It's from our 20 years journey of protecting this species, starting from very few individuals and also protecting very small area for nesting female, So in this 20-year journey, we figure out how to do that species husbandry in a captive breeding, conservation breeding very well. And so from very few numbers of turtles, we now have more than 2,000 turtles in the captive breeding centers in Myanmar. And annually now producing about 1,500 turtle eggs per year. So it's, huge hope for these Burmese roof turtles from rediscovery to now, towards recovery. But I wouldn't call it 100% success yet because we still facing, that extreme difficulties to protect this species. Let's compare to Burmese tortoise. Burmese tortoise is, after we release, they disperse just a small area, just a few miles only. We can tell from our radio telemetry data. And these riverine turtles, once we release it, they disperse so quickly to the big area, like maybe sometimes more than 100 miles away. So we have a limited radio we have a limited telemetry data to evaluate, all of their survival rate or dispersal pattern. That's our lesson learned. And a part of it is we cannot monitor or do this, monitoring telemetry work. Part of it is because of due to the civil war, we have restrictions of travel and many other, restrictions that we couldn't perform successfully. That's one reason. And also, other environmental problems as well, like gold mining is a big issue in the area, and human settlement on the nesting beaches. So, the turtles has a very fewer chance to compete with the human disturbance, and also the Tingling River, it's mainly their economy rely on their fishing. So the turtles are caught accidentally, even though people didn't target turtles purposely, but accidentally caught in the fishing nets. So that's how, turtles are drowning. So a lot of many factors. We are still, if compared to star tortoise, I wouldn't call this Burmese roof turtle successfully, like 100% successful story, but we still need to work to protect this species. So what we're going to do more is, since we have a lot of eggs from the captive breeding centers in Myanmar, we're going to transport, translocate them to the Upper Children area and then reintroduce them naturally, once they hatch. That's what we are going to do. So like, what I would like to, say about turtle work or turtle conservation work and also working in Myanmar, we do need really optimistic and also really resilience power to protect this species. How difficult it is, that never give up your hopes. Yeah. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Kalyar. And you brought up a great point. We do use the word successes in different scenarios, but the word success in turtle conservation and conservation in general is very much a moving target, as I think we've seen in Myanmar and in other countries where long-term conservation projects have been initiated, and then there's some sort of, we'll say, it might be a stochastic event or an event involving governments where things change, and we have to then, move what we define as success. Maybe that was success for the last 20 years, and then how do we now move forward from there? So thank you very much. I'm going to open this up now to the gallery view. Let me see. Let me see. All right. All right. We're now in gallery view. It is now time for the question and answer. Luckily, a lot of the panelists have been answering questions through the actual Q&A feature. You can still feel free to put in more questions. Whether or not we'll be able to get to all of them will have to do with the time. We have about 10 minutes left, but we might continue a little bit longer if there's some questions people would really like to have answered, and if our panelists have a little bit of extra time. I'm going to pose this first question to Anders Rhodin. This is from Tim Gregory. Why did the data deficient category go away?
Well, it hasn't. We didn't mention it when I was talking earlier, but the data deficient category is an important category, which also warrants extra support. Well, frankly, we are most focused on the critically endangered species and the species that are highlighted in this Turtles in Trouble booklet. But data deficient species are those species for which the specialist group does not have adequate data in order to make a reasonable decision as to what conservation status they should be placed under. So in other words, we're not sure whether they're least concern or whether they're vulnerable or endangered or near threatened. We simply don't know. And the worry about those species, and there's not that many of them, but there are certainly some out there, the worry is that if we don't know enough about those species, that perhaps they are in fact endangered and may be in trouble, and we want to make sure that they don't slip through the cracks. The Turtle Conservation Fund has been focused also on data deficient species with some extra funding that we had for a while, where we were providing support for people who are specifically looking at the status of species where there was insufficient data to make an accurate determination. We are continuing that focus, though to a lesser degree, because we no longer have funding specifically for that purpose. But data deficient species are incredibly important, and they have not been dropped, so to speak. They are still very much part of what we need to focus on. I think Craig may have another point that he'd like to raise here.
Can I just add quickly that for Tim's question, we would love to see the data deficient category emptied, if that were possible. Meaning we would love to be able to move species into a risk category, but then there's always a debate. Do you want to do that if we don't have good data to suggest that it belongs in another category? So there are many species that are in the DD category that we would really love to get data on. As I said myself an hour ago, so many species out there that we know just practically nothing about, where there might be one person in the world who knows something about that species based on actual firsthand field data.
And at the same time, we always need to prioritize where we utilize our scarce resources. And the question always is, do we need to put more resources into species that we know are critically endangered and we have identified the methods that we recognize are needed to preserve that species? Or do we use some of those resources to look into data deficient species? That question of prioritization is always very important, and sometimes there are disagreements about where we should be spending our limited resources. Jordan, you're mute.
I am on mute. No, I'm not. So yeah, no, those were excellent answers from both of you as regard to the data deficient category. So the next question is from Damien Codignato. I'm gonna put this one on Rick Hudson there. So Rick, be ready for this. Are there extensive ex-situ conservation efforts for the bog turtle, such as breeding programs, and how successful are they? And the reason I say that is because Turtle Survival Alliance and Zoo Knoxville have long been co-hosts of the Burn Tryon Southern Bog Turtle Fund, in which ex-situ conservation has been a major part of funding opportunities through this program.
Well, I think your best example is what the Knoxville Zoo has been doing with the population in Tennessee that Burn Tryon discovered, and that population was very small, and they started collecting nests and head starting some animals at the zoo, and they have started a second population. These are with known origin animals from Tennessee. And I think that's a really great example of how a zoo can get involved and support. I mean, but the issue is these populations are limited, and they're probably genetic issues that have not been ascertained. So when programs are set up, you need to know the origin of the animals that are going into the breeding stock, and that Knoxville Zoo is a great example. Knoxville Zoo also has a breeding program of North Carolina bog turtles, but I don't know that those are known origin. likely they're most from one known bog, but I don't know. Those are, I don't believe those have been bred for reintroduction yet, but that potential is there. That's the best example I can think of. I mean, I think there are some private hobbyists that are breeding bog turtles in the private sector. Those may not; those programs are likely unsanctioned by state or federal agencies, so will probably have limited conservation value. But Knoxville Zoo is the best example I can think of.
All right, thanks a lot, Rick.
Let me just add to that. There's nothing happening in the northern population. So as Jordan mentioned earlier, there's two distinct populations, and the captive breeding and reintroduction is part of the southern, but it's not been adapted up north. The main focus for bog turtle conservation up in the northern population is all about habitat management, restoration, and preservation.
Yeah, so a great demonstration of the disparities between the conservation management strategies between two management units right there. The next question I'm going to first pose to Andrew Walde, though anyone else may want to chime in. Andrew, this is from Ernst Bard. In my experience, any federal, national, and/or state or provincial government should remain primarily responsible for conservation, the full suite of threatened biota, turtles in this case. How can Turtle Survival Alliance assist with encouraging this support?
All right. Thanks, Ernst. It's a great question. Ideally, we'd like to see, federal, national, state, provincial governments getting in there and being part of it. But part of the reason there's a problem is often because they haven't been in there and being a part of it. So not providing the solutions or the funding to those solutions. So you end up relying on NGOs to bring that suite of skills into the game. But as you've heard today, from Joe Pignatelli about the collaboration in the Northeast on the bog turtles, they've been involved at the state and federal level. There's other species in the Northeast that have similar management plans with written out directed plans for their conservation and what needs to be done for that to work. And internationally, a great example is in Myanmar with Kaliar. The Burmese Star Project started out as having a roundtable discussion with all the stakeholders involved at the table, contributing to a plan. It was a multi-day workshop. And at the end of that, they came out with a management plan that had all the different potential strategies that we might want to use for the recovery of the Burmese star tortoise. And all the stakeholders from the government right down to the local villagers that would be impacted by these conservation efforts signed on to the program. So we had a written booklet of what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And if for whatever reason, which might have happened, some government level decided they didn't want to do it, we would just hold up the plan and say, but you agreed to it right here, kind of thing. And they were like, oh, yeah, we forgot we agreed to it. And then they allowed us to move forward, which is kind of what Joe was talking about with the bog turtles, how having that written document allowed him to look at what they wanted and then apply a conservation strategy or fill in a scientific question that needed answering. So, ideally, you want to get them to the table, get them involved, and become part of the solution. We often point fingers at government as being part of the problem, but getting them involved, everybody loves turtles. People do like conservation projects, so bringing them into the tent and getting them involved is the way forward all the time. And I'm hoping to be talking to you before the end of this year about South Africa. So we're coming to you.
Thanks, Andrew. Does anyone want to chime in on that one? Andrew covered it. There you go. So next I want to, this is a good one for Natalia. This is from Timothy Stewart. When rewilding turtles, how rigorous is the genetic testing? Is it essential that the released turtles originated in the exact location they are returned to?
Hi, Timothy. That's a great question. Well, it's getting better, I think, in terms of rigorosity. Um, mm, like historically speaking, genetic testing was not done, and currently people is either doing it or doing their best effort to doing it. Sometimes it is up to the resources and knowledge of the countries to do this in the best way possible, or not. But it is important to do it because if you don't, um, you can have three potential outcomes when you don't do genetic testing when you are repatriating animals. The first one is that nothing happens, which it's okay. Like if there's no risk, then it's fine. It's easier. You just drop the animal wherever you want to drop it, and there's zero consequences on doing that. The other consequence is that the animal is put in a place where it cannot adapt. So the animal either dies or cannot reproduce, which is not the outcome that you would like to do, right? When you repatriate an animal, what you like is that the animal, survives and be able to reproduce. That's the desired outcome. So if you spend a lot of effort and money putting an individual in a place and it does not survive, then you're basically wasting resources and not doing anything in terms of conservation. So that outcome you don't want to have. And then the third one is the most complicated one, because is when you may have a negative effect on the local populations. That's something that you also want to avoid, right? You don't want to repatriate an animal and then harm the locals. You want the locals to be well as well. So because you want to avoid these potential negative scenarios, it's important to do the genetic testing. As I said, how well or how rigorous you do that depends on the resources of the countries and the level of expertise. In the United States, genetic testing is usually always done, but currently it's taking way too long. And that's something that the TSA is trying to fix. We want to make this process as fast, as cost effective as possible. And that's why we are kind of launching a new project that's aimed at making genetic testing as fast and as cheap as possible, and to expand as much as we can the facilities that can do this type of analysis so that the repatriation can move faster.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Natalia. I think we'll do one more question and then we'll wrap up this webinar. We're just a couple minutes over now. Let me take a look here. I think this is a good one for Craig to answer, especially with a recent purchase that was made. So much of uh, turtle endangered situations, or the endangerment of turtles, has to do with human activities and expansion. How much can you and other organizations lead protective measures, such as the purchase of habitat, or law enforcement, so as not to have housing developments and roads allowed anymore, etc.?
Yeah, so Jordan is referring to the fact that I'm part of the Turtle Conservancy, another NGO that has a strategy of purchasing habitat to protect it, hopefully in perpetuity. And it works. It requires a lot of vertical investment, of course. That's a polite way of saying money. And it requires a lot of working with local authorities and neighbors that you have when you purchase the land. But it is an effective way in sometimes some places to protect the habitat for critically endangered turtles going forward. In terms of working with law enforcement, that's a tough one. I mean, I think when I think of law enforcement, I think of our Fish and Wildlife Service, which has a law enforcement arm, and they know the laws better than we do, and we're not usually in a good position to, I've actually been in this experience of being in other countries and meeting with government officials and wanting to bring up issues involving habitat protection, which might involve preventing illegal houses from being built or illegal roads. And that's a tough one because we are foreigners operating on foreign soil. So if you can work through a local collaborator, that's maybe a more effective way to do it. But of course, I won't know the laws of that country typically, or how you actually can get things done with government officials. So yeah, I mean, my bottom line answer is purchasing habitat is a great strategy if one has the resources to do it, and if you pick your sites carefully, since you can only do a limited number of them, then it can work, and we have protected species that way.
All right, great answer, Craig. So for all of those who asked questions that didn't get answered, we'll try to get those answered for you via email. If you would like to contact any of the panelists, please send an email to info@turtlesurvival.org so we can link you up to the panelists to ask specific questions. One thing I want to bring up is that, Turtles in Trouble is, again, it's created by a coalition, and you have all these groups, these organizations, these funding bodies that are working towards the preservation and the conservation of these highly endangered species, these most at-risk species. And there's many others. And one of the things that we didn't really get to touch on this is also how important the species that we still consider common are. And I know Craig has spoken a lot about this, is being able to put in effort, no matter how big or small, towards keeping relatively common species common, or those that we consider least concern, or at one of the lower ends of the threatened spectrum, which would be vulnerable. Again, this report highlights the most endangered of the endangered. I want to thank everyone for coming, and I do want to let you all know that there is a way to support Turtle Survival Alliance's activities for the 43 species that we actively work to protect out of the 66 featured in this report. And Elena, if you want to pop up a slide there, there is a way that you can help. First, as you may have seen in the chat, there are avenues to get the hard copies. So please reach out to Anders Rhodin and Craig Stanford about being able to acquire a hard copy of this. You can also get a PDF of this through the TFTSG website. And then there's a current campaign going on right now through us at Turtle Survival Alliance for the Turtles in Trouble. And this campaign is specifically aimed at being able to further our conservation activities for the 43 species we are currently working with, as well as species that we have forthcoming projects with in various countries. So please, if you'd like to support us in this campaign, we would be very, very appreciative of your support. And I want to turn it now back real quick to Marc Dupuis-Desormeaux, the President and CEO of Turtle Survival Alliance, for any last remarks. Other than that, keep on fighting the good fight. keep spreading awareness and keep doing every little bit that you can, because turtles deserve all of our collective efforts. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to Mark.
Thank you, Jordan. Well, first of all, thank you to all the panelists. It was great to have you on the panel. Really, interesting and active discussion, which I think is key for all of us who's listening. And of course, thank you to all of you who took the time, over an hour and a half now, for those who are still with us. Thank you very much for all coming, and support your local organizations and help the turtles in trouble. Thank you very much.
All right. That being said, we look forward to our next Turtle Survival Alliance webinar experience. Make sure you download that PDF, read it on any of the coalition partners' websites through their various, whether it's on a digital format like Issue, like we have on our Turtle Survival Alliance page, or through a PDF, or of course, make sure you get your hard copy from Turtle Conservancy and the Turtle Conservation Fund. So thank you all very much. Thanks to all the panelists. Thanks to everyone. And we'll see you next time. Here's to another century of zero turtle extinctions. Take care.